Story 1. Well, folks, it's that time again. My travels to and from Costa Rica have given me plenty of opportunities to witness some truly outrageous displays of entitlement when it comes to flying. Flying used to be a rare and fancy experience, but now it's more like a flying bus. I've seen a lot of interesting things, but this particular incident really took the cake. The other day, I had a 4-hour international flight scheduled to get back home. I had already booked a business class seat, knowing that a larger seat equals more comfort compared to being squished together like sardines in the main cabin. When I went to pre-board, the gate agent informed me that she had moved me farther forward. Okay, cool, thank you, I thought. They wheeled me, in my wheelchair, to the door of the plane, and I discovered that I had been upgraded to first class. What a score! I love first class, but it's usually prohibitively expensive, so I rarely purchase a first-class ticket. The only other person pre-boarding in a wheelchair was sitting just in front of me in first class. I had just watched her make a huge scene while boarding, complete with crying, whining, and yelling. I got the sense that she might be a tad dramatic because she was only wearing an over-the-counter, not-so-supportive knee brace. She didn't have crutches, a cane, or anything else you might expect with a serious knee injury or disease. But whatever, people are entitled to be as eccentric as they want to be. Once regular boarding started, I got to see my seatmate for the flight, a man with a magnificent quiff of chestnut hair tied in a man bun and a large beard. He was dressed in old shorts and a stained t-shirt. I had watched people in the airport waiting room give him a wide berth and unfriendly looks, almost as if they had bathed in hand sanitizer and didn't want to get too close. I was curious about his story, so imagine my surprise when he ended up sitting right next to me, just behind the dramatic knee lady. We settled in, and over a glass of wine, we started talking. He turned out to be a retiree from both the federal government and the military, just like my husband. He was traveling around the world, going to places that caught his interest with nothing more than a backpack. We were having a great conversation, with a bit of laughter thrown in, but we were speaking at a regular conversational level, not loudly at all. We had only been airborne for about 30 minutes when knee lady started yelling for the flight attendants to move me and my seatmate. Her reasoning: we were dirty hippies who didn't belong in first class. He and I looked at each other and laughed. We're both over 60, and yes, he was dressed very casually, but he was clean and didn't smell. I was wearing a linen tunic printed with an Edel fabric, black pants, and Birkenstocks. One of my kids always teases me that this outfit makes me look like I'm on my way to teach yoga in Connecticut, sort of a mix between alternative and suburban upper-class lady. Thankfully, the flight attendant had a lot of common sense. She told knee lady that she wouldn't be moving us anywhere, but offered to ask us to lower our voices if that would help. We both smiled at the attendant and assured her that we would be quieter. After that, lunch was served, followed by a nap. When we arrived in Costa Rica, I witnessed a jetway Jesus moment as knee lady suddenly seemed able to walk without much trouble once her suitcase arrived. I couldn't help but laugh as the airport staff pushed me out to my car. I swear, I feel so sorry for everyone who has to deal with people like this. Story 2. I was watching a video which reminded me of this satisfying story. You know the casual trolls bullies on the internet, where they just cuss you out for no reason at all? Yup, those who love the internet anonymity and just exploit it like what you do does not come with consequences. Well, this troll didn't think this through when he tried to bully me and my mother. The backstory. One morning after a big party, I got on my phone to check if anyone had texted me overnight. To my surprise, I got a message from someone who was not on my friends list, so I checked it out and there was just a single line of text. Is my _mother's name your mother? I was like, what the hell? Because this kid, let's call him Silly Boy, was like 14 or something, and he lived on the other side of the country. I texted him back confirming and asking why he asked, and he just went on a rampage. Silly Boy called my mother something like a fat, big witch, stupid cow, ugly, you know the drill. Before doing anything else, I called her to check what this was all about. After saying his name, she immediately asked why I was asking, and I explained the situation. She was mad. She told me that silly boy replied to one of her comments on some post on FB where she was giving her opinion, I know, a huge mistake about something connected to sun's influence on the health. She owns couple sunbathing studio solariums, which is kinda relevant to the story, and he went ballistic on her. Then he started messaging her on her DMs, where she tried to argue as politely as she could, to no avail. What a shocker. After seeing the pointlessness of the conversation, she just stopped replying. But taking it back on her friends and relatives was the last straw, and she said she will do something about it. I was pissed at this kid because of all the stuff he said, but for the sake of it, and due to still not being fully sober plus just awakened, I decided to try to argue back with him for a couple minutes. Casual two idiots arguing on the internet. I was like 17 at the time or something. Eventually I just blocked him. After laughing at his replies with some friends at that moment, I didn't know how useful this whole trash talk would be in a couple hours. The build-up. After a couple minutes, she called me asking to verify something for her. She told me to go to this kid's Facebook account and check if I could find some information about this kid, what would lead her to his actual location, etc. I personally couldn't imagine my mother driving to his house and shouting at him. 'Cause first of all, total time waste, second of all, true care and move. But I told her I will see what I could find. Silly boy had public profile with all the cells filled up. I got his address and relatives, which was what I went there for, but what is more, I found his school name and address. With a smile, I picked up my phone and called my mother. I told my mother that there is no point contacting his parents, as he will get away with a shake of head with disapproval, especially that it was like 12 o'clock and he will be at the school. I told her to call there and verify that silly boy was actually studying there. After that, she told the office lady what happened, and she transferred it to the principal. After listening to the whole story, the principal said that he was very sorry and that he will do something about it. We thought nothing of it. Maybe the kid will get a talk with his parents and that's it. Oh, were we wrong there? The revenge. I mentioned the usefulness of the trash talk, right? Well, I've sent the screenshots of the conversation. My replies were mostly like, "What's wrong with you?" and "Are you okay?" 'Cause I just wanted to taunt him to my mother, and she emailed them to the school's principal. Now is a good time to say something more about these insults. Well, I'm from Poland, and we do not go easy on those. The casual, duck, witch, unalive yourself, etc. just isn't enough for us. So when I say that there were some curses, that kid at his age shouldn't have even heard about it, I mean it. But swear words are just words. It's what he actually said that got him down. Firstly, he said that he will kill my mother and disrespect the corpse. But the best part was when I tried to talk back, asking what his parents think of his behavior. I don't know what was in this kid's head, but he said, "My parents have been killed in an accident half a year ago, and I made it my duty to stop people from telling lies, and your stupid mother was saying insert opinion about sunbathing, which killed my aunt cause she is dead from cancer. Before you say that maybe it was trauma," during conversation he said multiple comments, that his parents are skin doctors, and they say he is right and support all the comments, so I know he was lying to me. So now, imagine all this and screenshots from my mother at his principal desk. This was already satisfying. Aftermath. After a couple of days, my mother called me again, telling me the following aftermath of our actions. It was glorious. The very same day he texted me, silly boy was taken out of his classroom mid-lesson and brought to the principal's office, without knowing what was about to happen. In the office, there were his parents, disgusted and angry, and also the school psychiatrist, waiting to talk to him. He had to explain to her why he said that his parents and aunt were dead. He was pretty graphic with their death. Then he had to listen to the principal talking about this behavior is unacceptable, and that he has embarrassed the school, and only then he was taken home to have a talk with his parents. The cherry on top is that his actions lead to the school organizing a lecture for the whole school about cyberbullying and cybersecurity, with examples of anonymous students' behavior. He was like top-class student with no problems in the past. so they took it seriously. He also had to attend school psychiatrist weekly. Until the end of the school year, it was November, due to his drastic comments. Well, it's been like 4 years already. But imagining his face when he realized my message, "You will regret saying all this," wasn't a bluff, and that his actions indeed have consequences still put a smile on my face. My mother got a bouquet with a formal apology. We agreed that it is okay for him to apologize by phone, with no need to make a public post on his Facebook and humiliating him online. And he got a valuable lesson to not mess with people online, 'cause you may get burnt. Story 3. We just spent a weekend with family, and we are the only couple without children. We were in a cabin with 6 children, 2 of whom have significant attachment issues and scream for their parents if they are not being held by their mother or father. The entire weekend revolved around these 2. My husband and I were constantly given tasks to help with the children, including babysitting while their mother looked after the other child. The youngest was put down for naps in the common area, and we were repeatedly told to be quiet so as not to wake him. We barely had any time to ourselves. We wanted to get away for a hike or a swim in the lake, but that never happened. The cherry on top was at the airport. My husband and I ran ahead and got through security to finally enjoy some alone time. There was an issue at security with the parents, and my sister spotted us sitting with our luggage and yelled at us to come help. My husband ran off, and I grabbed our luggage to see what the problem was. She left my husband with a bunch of bags, 2 screaming toddlers, and a stroller, then disappeared. I came to his rescue, grabbed the loudest child, and tried to calm him down. We wound up waiting for 15 minutes with 2 screaming children, receiving disapproving looks from everyone around us. My brother-in-law came through and profusely apologized before taking the kids. My sister arrived shortly after and barked orders for me to find some snacks for the kids as their flight was about to board. It's incredibly unfair to rope us into looking after children that aren't our responsibility. An elderly woman approached us afterward and asked if we were okay and if we knew those kids. I told her I was their aunt, and she gave me a pitiful look. These children are not well behaved and have attachment issues, throwing tantrums constantly. Thank goodness we were on a different flight. Afterward, my husband told me he's now having second thoughts about having kids, and to be honest, so am I. We have another big family trip in October, and we will be on a cruise. My sister asked what flight we are taking so we can help. My husband and I are making an action plan to make ourselves scarce and will be booking a separate flight. Update: my sister is now asking if we can book our flight in the afternoon to help her with the kids. We booked a flight as early as possible in the morning and will not be telling her when. Edit: the upcoming cruise is a gift from my parents, as they want the whole family to be together. We paid for our own flight, however. Story 4. It was a busy Saturday afternoon, and the store was packed. We'd done our weekly shopping and were ready to check out. There were long lines at every register, but we picked the one that seemed to be moving the quickest. As we got closer to the front, I noticed the cashier. She was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, and she was in a wheelchair. Despite her disability, she was working efficiently, scanning items and bagging them with practiced ease. I was impressed by her skill and dedication. But then, this woman, let's call her Karen because that's exactly what she was, started making a fuss 2 people ahead of us in line. At first, it was just impatient sighs and foot tapping. But as the minutes ticked by, her frustration seemed to grow. "Karen, can't you go any faster? Some of us have places to be." The cashier looked up, a bit startled. She'd been focused on her work and hadn't noticed Karen's growing annoyance. "Cashier, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm going as fast as I can." "Karen, well, it's not fast enough. Why are they even letting someone like you work here if you can't keep up?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom and I exchanged shocked glances. The poor cashier looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "Cashier, I assure you, I'm trained for this job and I'm doing my best." "Karen, Your best isn't good enough. I've been standing here for 10 minutes already." That was a lie. We'd all been in line for about that long, and Karen had only been at the register for a couple of minutes at most. But she was on a roll now, and facts didn't seem to matter. The customer Karen was berating the cashier over finished paying and quickly moved away, looking uncomfortable. Now it was Karen's turn. She started slamming her items onto the conveyor belt, making everyone jump. "Karen, maybe this will teach you to hurry up." The cashier flinched but kept her composure. She started scanning Karen's items, her hands shaking slightly. I had to admire her professionalism in the face of such nastiness. As the cashier worked, Karen kept up a steady stream of complaints. "Karen, this is ridiculous. They should have more registers open, and they definitely shouldn't have hired you. It's not fair to the rest of us who have actual lives and responsibilities." "Cashier, ma'am, please. I'm doing my job as quickly as I can." "Karen, not quickly enough. God, you're useless." And then, to everyone's horror, Karen reached across the counter and shoved the cashier. The young woman's wheelchair rolled backward, and she let out a startled cry. That's when my mom stepped in. I've always known my mom was a force to be reckoned with, but I'd never seen her quite like this before. "Mom, hey, what do you think you're doing?" Karen whirled around, her face red with anger. "Karen, stay out of this. It's none of your business." "Mom, you just assaulted that young woman. That makes it everyone's business." "Karen, I didn't assault anyone. I just gave her a little push to wake her up. She shouldn't be working here if she can't handle it." My mom stepped closer to Karen, her voice low and dangerous. "Mom, listen here, you entitled brat. That little push was assault, and the only one who doesn't belong here is you. Karen, how dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am?" "Mom, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You don't get to treat people like that." By this point, a small crowd had gathered. The store manager, alerted by another employee, came rushing over. "Manager, what's going on here?" Karen immediately turned to the manager, probably thinking she'd found an ally. "Karen, finally, someone in charge. This cashier is incompetent and slow. She's holding up the entire line, and when I politely asked her to speed up, this woman started harassing me. I couldn't believe the lies coming out of her mouth, but my mom wasn't having it." "Mom, that's not what happened, and you know it. This woman verbally abused your employee and then physically shoved her. There are plenty of witnesses here who can confirm that." The manager looked around, and several people nodded in agreement. Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Karen, that's not. I didn't. You can't believe them." "Manager, ma'am, we have security cameras that will show exactly what happened. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store immediately." "Karen, leave? But my groceries." "Manager, are no longer your concern. You're banned from this store. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police and have you removed." Karen looked around, seemingly expecting someone to jump to her defense. When no one did, she let out a frustrated scream. "Karen, fine, I didn't want to shop in this dump anyway. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." With that, she stormed out, leaving her cart full of groceries behind. The manager immediately turned his attention to the cashier. "Manager, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" The cashier shook her head, still looking shaken. "Cashier, no, I'm okay, just a bit rattled." "Manager, take the rest of the day off. We'll cover your shift." The cashier nodded gratefully and wheeled herself away from the register. As she passed us, my mom reached out and gently touched her arm. "Mom, you handled that with incredible grace. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." "Cashier, thank you for standing up for me. Not many people would have done that." "Mom, anyone with a shred of decency would have done the same. You take care of yourself, okay?" The cashier gave us a small smile and headed to the back of the store. The manager started redirecting people to other lines, but he paused when he got to us. "Manager, thank you for intervening. Too often, people just stand by and watch when things like this happen. Mom, I couldn't just watch that woman abuse your employee. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially someone just trying to do their job. The manager nodded in agreement. Manager, we'll be reviewing the security footage and deciding whether to press charges. Would you be willing to give a statement if needed? Mom, absolutely. Whatever I can do to help. We gave our contact information to the manager and finally made our way out of the store. As we walked to the car, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Mom, that was amazing. The way you stood up to that woman. Mom, I just did what was right, honey. You can't let people get away with treating others like that. But weren't you scared? She seemed pretty aggressive. Mom, of course I was a little scared. But being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Sometimes, being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. I hope I can be as brave as you someday. Mom, you already are, sweetie. You stood by me the whole time. That takes courage, too. As we drove home, I kept replaying the scene in my mind. I thought about the cashier, how she'd remained professional even in the face of such cruelty. I thought about Karen and how her entitlement had led her to treat another human being so horribly. And I thought about my mom, stepping in without hesitation to defend a stranger. It was a lot to process. Part of me was angry that people like Karen existed, people who thought they were better than others and could treat them however they wanted. But a bigger part of me was inspired by the cashier's resilience and my mom's bravery. I realized that day that standing up for what's right isn't always easy. It can be scary, and sometimes it means putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. But it's necessary, because if good people don't speak up, the Karens of the world will think they can get away with anything. The next time we went to that grocery store, I was happy to see the cashier back at her register. She recognized us and gave us a warm smile. She seemed more confident now, and I like to think that knowing there were people willing to stand up for her had something to do with that. As for Karen, we never saw her in the store again. I heard through the grapevine that the store had indeed pressed charges for assault. I don't know what came of it, but I hope she learned something from the experience. Story 5. This will be somewhat long as it needs some context. I'll include a lot of details to make it easier to understand. I'll put a star where the story proper starts, in case anyone wants to skip the preamble. Minor details might not be entirely accurate, as I have no interest in rekindling this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any revival could only taint the experience. To begin, I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked in various types of security in many different locations. The experience that matters for this story was my time spent at the rental housing tribunal in a major city, where I worked in a role similar to a bailiff. For those unfamiliar with what that is, think of a courtroom in a major city. Anyway, in a smaller town, it might be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. While they serve the same function for landlords and tenants, they are not exactly the same thing. This place exclusively dealt with landlord and tenant disputes, and it was the only venue to resolve such conflicts. It's important to note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms most accurately describe the situation and my role in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my security career, and I was around 18-20 years old. Given that it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I witnessed was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one can surprise me with a story because I've seen them all. As a side duty, I had to ensure all parties had copies of the evidence being presented, which meant I did a lot of photocopying and always re-inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or became illegible. By the time I left, I probably knew the system well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, not really, but I certainly didn't need a lawyer if I ever found myself there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. For example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how frustrated adjudicators would get when a party spoke out of turn. Seriously, don't do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and moved to a fairly large town in the same province with the same tenant laws. I had a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We got along well, but there was a problem. Only I could write checks, and our paydays didn't line up. So, I was the one who paid the rent, but I usually couldn't do it on the first of the month because my roommates didn't always pay on time. We informed the landlord that we might be a day or two late, but we'd always have it paid by the third at the latest. They had no problem with this arrangement. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this worked fine. The landlord had no complaints because, even if we were often a day or two late, we always paid. We were also fairly quiet and didn't damage the property nearly model tenants. I have no idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. Suddenly, one day, we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This didn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. However, now we had to cover the application fee the landlord paid to serve the summons. I complained to the neighbor, who was also the superintendent, and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding rent be paid on the 1st of the month with no exceptions. This really didn't work for us, so we probably ended up paying that fee 15-20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to the tribunal over it, but we were technically in the wrong, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I could have accused them of harassment, but I didn't have time for that, and my roommates didn't care. When split between us, the fee wasn't enough of a deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this had been the only issue, there wouldn't be much of a story. But around the same time the rent leeway disappeared, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea by the end. We endured it. We were all working too many hours at low-paying jobs to do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, everything fell apart. Everyone except me moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details about my roommates because things kind of exploded for a few different reasons unrelated to this situation. There's no reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up for a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately find another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with. And with my experience at the Rental Housing Tribunal, I knew I had the landlord in a difficult position. So, I went after them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second. So, I went to the tribunal with a meticulously documented collection of evidence showing the landlord's failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I knew from experience that technically, you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about the leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So, I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up 100% total ambush. They argued that they were caught off guard, but the adjudicator dismissed the case, reprimanded me a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and their lawyer drove 3 hours to get there, for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day arrived. It had been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I was prepared to pay if I lost, but I didn't think I was going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20-30 pages of evidence and 20 or so photographs. They had nothing. They had no real defense for our water heater being out for 6 months, or for us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late with rent, which actually worked against them once the adjudicator learned how many times we had paid the application fee, as well as lies that had no evidence to support them. They even interrupted me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every ounce of willpower I had so only a squeak came out that the adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I had ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice that I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Since the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give them the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he might have a heart attack. He didn't, though. Goodbye, Mark. Edit to clarify a few things based on questions. I also want to add that I do sympathize with good landlords out there. My time at the rental housing tribunal was eye-opening. For every bad landlord, there are easily 10 bad tenants. There's a massive debate to be had over the whole thing, but I'll only say that I do sympathize with the good landlords out there. I'm not trying to paint all landlords as terrible. This was the only landlord I ever had who was so irresponsible. Edit. I've revised my estimate of the ratio based on some research and comments, from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I might still be wrong, but the sheer number disparity between landlords and tenants effectively means there are more bad tenants than bad landlords, simply because there are so many more tenants than landlords. I'm going to leave it at that and just ask you not to criticize me too harshly from either side. I'm intimately aware of the problems both good landlords and good tenants face, and my sympathy goes out to both sides. Story 6. So this happened to me years ago, 1985. My mother worked for what was the first computer supply company in the USA in lovely Compton, California, gang capital of the world at the time. She had heard they needed an order puller, and I got the job. I hated this job right away because for some reason after working hard for 8+ hours a day, I'd go to sleep and dream I was still working, so I always felt tired. Most of the guys I worked with were good guys. One was a former Mexican mafia gang member, Victor, who gave up that life and really turned his life around. One day, they hired Gino. He was an Italian-American, but wanted to be a Mexican gang member more than anything. He latched on to Victor after finding out about his past and was always asking about the gang lifestyle, and he was hoping that Victor could help him get into the gang. Victor told him about his life, but refused to introduce him as he gave that up and didn't want to go back. Gino wasn't happy about this. One day, I started noticing Gino was finished working before all of us, and that for some reason, I was not finishing until way later than the others. I wasn't slacking or working slow, so I started to wonder why. One day, I saw Gino coming out of the warehouse manager's office area. It was just a desk between 2 partitions, acting strange when he noticed I saw him. We were given our stacks of orders for the day, and I noticed that mine was double the size of Gino's. I figured out he must have been putting his orders in my stack before the manager gave them out, but had no proof. The next day, I got there early and climbed up on one of the storage racks. You know, the kind you see at Home Depot, above the desk where I couldn't be seen. The manager was inside the office getting coffee when I saw Gino go to his desk and slip half of his orders into my pile. I waited until he left and went inside to tell the manager. He came out and counted the orders and noticed I had many more than I should have, and Gino's were half of what he gave him. When we all got together to get our orders later, all of them had a few extra in them and Gino was gone. He got fired for what he did, but to make matters worse, he told Victor that he was coming back to kill me for reporting him, and Victor advised I leave because he knew he was serious, and that Gino wanted to have something like a killing on his reputation for getting into a gang. I was furious at the manager for telling him I reported him, so I quit on the spot, but not before going inside to tell my mom what happened. She was good friends with the owner and told him about the incident, and he was so sorry it happened, and he promptly walked out into the warehouse and fired the manager for putting my life in danger by not being more discreet about who reported Gino. I heard later he threw me under the bus because he was afraid of Gino himself. Fast forward a few months, and I had a better job working at a well-known amusement park. One night, the local Los Angeles channel had a special on gang violence that I watched. One segment was about an armed robbery, in which two gang members robbed a convenience store, and the store video had the two gang members' faces clearly on the screen, and there was sound also. They not only robbed the store, but the one gang member shot and killed the clerk for no reason. Guess who that gang member was? Gino. I recognized him by his face, tattoos, and voice. At the end, they said it was still unsolved and to call the Lake County sheriffs if there was any information. I called immediately and 2 detectives came by the next morning. A few weeks later, the detective called me to thank me because they not only arrested him, but got the other guy too. Dumb Gino even had the murder weapon on him when arrested. They contacted me a few months later to inform me that Gino and his friend both got life without parole.